Great to be with you all this morning. I believe it has been, we were trying to figure out the time exactly, but 8 or 9 years since I came back when you guys were meeting in the Sneed Center down the road. So it's a joy to be back with you. I didn't really have anything prepared for this hour. I was just going to talk about our story, I guess, and I'd really love some questions from you guys. So feel free to be thinking of those, just church planning related questions, personal viewpoint questions, however I can just be a blessing and encouragement to you guys. As Clark mentioned, went to Liberty, had to do an internship for that degree. So I graduated in May, but it was contingent on an internship. Went down to Grace Life Church in Muscle Shoals, Alabama to do that, and I was planning on just staying the summer, but God had different plans. There was a very attractive church secretary there that I met. Her name was Becky, and ended up staying there, not just a summer, but 4 years. And typically I'm not really one to make significant life decisions in a short amount of time, but within the span of 2 weeks, everything just fell into place. I was accepted at a seminary, Southern Seminary, that had an extension center nearby, and also found a job within 48 hours of looking at just selling appliances at Sears, and also found a place to stay with the church's computer guy and a spare bedroom for $100 a month, and Becky and I started dating as well. So all in that 2-week period. So I was just like, well, this seems like it's working out pretty well. I think it's probably good to stay here. So ended up staying 4 years. The latter 3 of those years, I was a full-time hospice chaplain servicing 7 counties in northwestern Alabama. That was a really nice, ministry experience. It helped me a lot, helped me grow in certain areas. And the director of the hospice was a very strong Christian, a small group leader at Grace Life. And so me and him were really able to partner together pretty well, and we were very like-minded in that. And then Brother Steve McAllister, who's Vice President of Anchor and Truth, just took me out to lunch one day, and I'd already been volunteering and helping out at Grace Life in various ways, really whatever they needed, everything from sort of overseeing the college ministry to turning out the lights once a month, once everyone was out of the building. So whatever they needed, I pretty much tried to do it. And so Steve took me out to lunch and just said, we've heard you preach. I'd preached some on Wednesday evening, and he said, we affirm your giftedness, we affirm your character. Basically just pick a city, if you would like to plant a church through Anchored in Truth, and see if we can get any financial help from the SBC in doing that, and then Anchored in Truth will make up the difference. And so we did that, and the SBC was targeting 32 cities in America that they call send cities. So these are major metropolitan areas in North America, just the United States and Canada, that have a very low percentage of professing evangelicals. And so it's not like Nashville or Dallas or something like that, but it's a lot of northeastern cities, a lot of West Coast cities. And in between my wife's parents in New York State and my parents, who are now used to live in New York State, now living in Virginia, there are 4 send cities in between those two: Pittsburgh, D.C., Philly, and Baltimore. And so we were looking at Pittsburgh. We checked that out first and ended up not even visiting the other 3 cities. We just felt so much at home in Pittsburgh. We didn't know anybody at all, but we just loved the city. And so we visited another time or two, and then we moved up there in August of 2014. And I really didn't know. There was a lot I didn't know, and I didn't know even everything that I didn't know. So I was very much a steep learning curve. I mean, I had good preaching experience. Was blessed with a very good theological education, but I literally read one book on church planting specifically before going up there, and it wasn't even a good one. So we went up there, and no paid pastoral experience before at all, and we just started with 3 people in our living room, and 2 of them were Becky and myself, and just started meeting there for a Bible study. And I was meeting people. That was my main job. I was blessed to have the full salary taken care of, so I was freed up full time to just do whatever I could around the community to make connections with people. So I did a lot of different interest groups, different clubs, and I got a job at Best Buy just to kind of meet people there, and volunteering, and really whatever I could do. We got pretty creative with different venues to meet people, and we were just praying that God would bring the people that He desired. And so I basically put up the way we kind of got it beyond the three of us initially is there was a website, meetup.com. Sounds like a dating website, but it's not. It's just different interest groups like photography or hiking or really any hobby that people have. They'll do a meetup and sort of make a club there. And so we put up the Bible study as a meetup group, and we got I think 3 or 4 additional people from that. These weren't necessarily people who were looking to help us start the church. They were just people who were interested in a Bible study. And so we continued with that study for 2 years, really. We called it Community Bible Study. It was an interdenominational study, so we had people who were like practicing Catholics coming, mainline, more liberal Lutherans coming, and really just a smorgasbord of different viewpoints and things like that. And they were looking, though, for Bible teaching, which is, maybe they weren't getting that in their church. And some of them, of course, didn't go to church. Many of them didn't go to church at all. And so this wasn't really like people, this wasn't like church members kind of stuff. Like this was just whoever from the community would come. But there was an understanding there that we were trying to use that study to start a church out of it. And so we went for 2 years. We met in my house for 1 year, and then the second year was a Lutheran church on Tuesday evenings. And then I determined that once we got enough people, I wanted to start preaching. So I kind of eased into it. So when I say Bible study, I mean like a circle of chairs, and it was more discussion, right? It wasn't really me preaching. It was just more of a teaching and interactive time. And but then I started preaching, I guess, monologuing. I was sitting down and sort of just had my little monologue for 10 minutes, and then I moved it to 15, and then 20, and 25, sort of eased them into it, and then I started arranging the chairs in rows and actually standing in front of a music stand. And at that point, it was basically preaching a sermon, and we would I would teach, and then we would split up into discussion groups after that. And it still wasn't a church service, no music or anything like that. We weren't calling it church, but there was basically just a preaching point in the community. And then I determined I wanted at least 10 people in the chairs at all times. If I'm preaching, just for the sake of my own dignity, I'd like there for at least to be 10 people sitting there. So that was sort of our what determined our timeline for starting the church. And of course, you got to take into account the lower attendance Sundays and people in children's ministry and things like that. But we kind of made the switch. We knew we were going to lose a lot of the people who were just around for the Bible study and had no plans of leaving their own churches. And so we knew we were going to lose a lot of the people when we went to a Sunday morning meeting time and started calling it church. And so eventually, though, we just ripped off the Band-Aid, and 2 years in, we started doing that. Brother Steve came up, and we covenanted together as a church. He preached that service, and with, I believe, 14 charter members, and we then started using the facilities of a Methodist church there. They were very gracious to us. They were sharing a pastor with another Methodist church, and so the guy couldn't be in 2 places at once, so he'd go to this church at 9:30 and the other church at the 11 o'clock hour. So that meant this church had a free time slot Sunday morning at 11:15 for us to use, and we got that for I think $200 or $300 a month that they let us use their building for Sunday morning. So that was a tremendous blessing. We stayed there for around a year and a half. Then we went to a public elementary school where it was like a gymnasium/auditorium combination, and met there until COVID hit, and then they didn't want any outside groups, and so we took 3 months off, and we just did Facebook Live during those 3 months of the initial period for COVID, and then we got back together at a hotel at right across the street from the regional mall there. So very, very desirable and strategic location there that had allowed us to see continued growth, and we met there for a year and a half. So we've sort of done it all: home, church building, school, hotel, everything. And then in December of 2020, we were able to purchase a building of our own It's just a tremendous blessing. One of our church members had a connection at that church. They only had about 5 or 10 people, and so it was suggested to us that we approach them and see if they'd be interested in selling the building. Offered them some money. They turned down our initial offer, but then 9 months later, the pastor contacted me and just accepted the initial offer with no further negotiations. So that was really good, and we acquired that. It needed a lot of work, still does, but it's the unchangeables of it are very good. It's about 3 acres of flat land and very desirable and strategic location, and it seats probably a maximum seat capacity of around 200 people. So there's some room for growth there, and it's we're very blessed to have it. So we have been renovating that. We moved into that 3 months ago in November of last year, and the renovations continue, so plenty of work left to do, but the auditorium itself is in relatively good condition. And then throughout this period, it's always been steady growth. It's not, hasn't been like an exceptional season where we just exploded, and there hasn't been any significant turmoil that would reduce our attendance. And so it's just been just a very steady, gradual growth throughout the past 7 years, really, 5 years of being an actual church. So that's where we are today. We have about maybe 80 adults on average, and maybe 15 or 20 kids on average Sunday. And we do community groups throughout the week in people's homes, so basically home-based Bible studies that are throughout the area geographically. We have about 4 of those, and around 60% of our people are involved in that. So we're trying to get that percentage up, and then we do Wednesday evening Bible study as well. So those are the main fixtures of our ministry. So we've learned a lot about what not to do, and also maybe a few things about what to do. So that's sort of the timeline. That's 7 years and about 10 minutes. So I will open it up for any questions. I'd really like the questions to be the majority of our time this morning. Like I said, I want to be helpful for you guys, the things that are actually on your mind. So it could be doctrinal, it could be just our story, or how we did this, how we did that. So you guys be thinking. You've been quiet so far. So yeah, I would love to. I grew up as the son of a pastor, Southern Baptist pastor, and came to faith actually through reading a Left Behind book, as it turns out. So of course my dad would, he would have a regular Bible teaching time with me, essentially a miniature expository sermon every day for 10 or 15 minutes. So I had a lot of head knowledge, but it hadn't gotten to my heart. But as I was reading a Left Behind book, not for any spiritual purpose, but just because we lived in a rural area and there really wasn't anything to do one summer, and I was just bored, and so I was like, well, I'll just go ahead and read this book. And one character was witnessing to another character in the book, and that's actually what the Lord used to convict me of my sins and to show me my need for a Savior. And so, through that book, I repented and put my faith in Christ, and I already had all the knowledge of it, but that's when it became real for me, and I really responded as the Lord calls us to respond, and was baptized soon after. I was very, very earnest from, an early age, especially when I started reading the Bible each day. I would read a devotional for the first year of my Christian walk, I think the Oswald Chambers devotional, just 5 or 10 minutes a day. But I finally opened up the Bible itself and started reading it, and that's when things just really took off spiritually, and I really began to grow in significant ways in my sanctification. And so I had opportunities for ministry, honestly, probably too early. The church there, it was just a small country church, not a lot going on, and so they were just doing all this. They had this youth Sunday every year, and they wanted to get a youth speaker, so they kind of conscripted me. That it was just a small youth group, and there weren't a lot of other options for them, I guess, but they conscripted me to preach the sermon like 6 months after conversion, which I really don't think that was necessarily a wise decision, but that's what they did. And so I totally plagiarized the whole thing. Went on sermoncentral.com and plagiarized it, and I was quoting Greek words and such, and it was pretty bad though. So, but then the next year I preached the same youth Sunday, and the Lord actually used it. That was, the Spirit really moved and seemed to have an effect on people, and that was my own sermon, not not any plagiarism, and that's when the Lord just started opening up more doors for churches in that area. Just again, small country churches, many of them without pastors, that wanted someone to fill the pulpit. And I don't know if they thought I was good or if they just liked the novelty of having a high schooler preach their sermon for them. But there was about 5 or 6 churches in that area that I just started kind of going around to on a somewhat regular basis and preaching for them. So the Lord gave me nice preaching opportunities, and I also sort of led a club called First Priority in our high school, public high school, and so we had regular teaching opportunities there every Friday morning before the school day started, and so we tried to be very, very active in reaching out in the high school there. So that's sort of what the beginnings of my Christian life looked like. Originally I wasn't really thinking of being a pastor. My dad unfortunately had some bad experiences in some churches, and so I really didn't desire that very much. But the Lord just kept getting a hold of my heart, and slowly but surely, I think by the senior year of high school, I was pretty set on pursuing religious studies at Liberty and then at Southern Seminary. And hopefully that answers the question well. And this was all in Virginia. But we had lived in New Jersey and New York State and elsewhere in Pennsylvania before that as well. So we kind of had some northern blood, I guess. Born in Texas, but lived in New York. So both worlds. Other questions? Anything you guys are curious about? Yes. Divergent viewpoints. Yeah, I mean, it was just it was just an interesting discussion, I guess. We definitely got into all that stuff. I mean, I remember there was nobody was really, I guess, had an exceptionally high theological stature in the group, except for one person. It was actually a Church of Christ guy who came along, and he was starting his own church out 30 minutes before that, and he was definitely trying to recruit from it. He was trying to get us saved. Of course, they believe that baptism is necessary for salvation, and we would say that's not the gospel, right? We believe Galatians teaches that is a different gospel. Anytime you require any work or ritual as a requirement for salvation, that is, it's not the gospel of grace. And so he's the only person I ever had to uninvite. He, typically I would be able, because it'd be like, somebody who was just, they might have held a divergent viewpoint, but they didn't really have the potential to be very influential in the group. I was able to honestly use their divergent viewpoint as an opportunity to teach on something. But this guy, he was very knowledgeable, he had a lot of charisma, very well studied, and he had a very active agenda. So I ended up having to ask him not to come back. But so that was the only sort of issue that we ran into. But the rest of it, these people were coming because they just wanted Bible teaching. So even if they were a Catholic, even if they were involved in a church that had a divergent viewpoint, they were coming, I think, because they just weren't being. I think several of them were regenerate and just mixed up in these other churches, and because they were regenerate, they just had a desire for Bible teaching that they weren't being fed at their church, and so that's why they were coming. They just wanted Bible teaching, and they were mixed up about a few things, but I think very, very open and very teachable, and so I think for the most part they really benefited, and it was good just to have the opportunity to talk through some of those things. So it's a very positive experience. We had one woman and her daughter who were there. That initial group, when I said we got 3 or 4 people from that meetup website, um, her and her daughter, they moved away like a few months later, but they just came back to our church like 4 weeks ago. Like she forgot my name, but like my last name, but she looked up Josh in her email, and apparently I'd sent her a single email, and she dug it up from 6 years ago and figured out my last name and Googled it and found our church again. And so her and her daughter, who instead of being 8 or 9 is now 15 years old, and she just came. She's been coming for 3 or 4 weeks and volunteered now for PowerPoint and after church snack rotation, and so it's kind of cool to see her come full circle. She had moved out of town and now she moved back. So yeah, that's neat. A little blast from the past. Good. Other questions? Initial, I mean, it depends how, like the initial 14 charter members, or even before that. Before that, none. Well, my wife, she stuck with me. Yeah, the others, like the people we were getting for that, honestly, and from the meetup website, they're just kind of, honestly, kind of flaky. They're in this and then they're doing that, and they're just looking for. They weren't really like serious looking to start something. They were just like, oh, that Bible study looks fun. Let's do that. So, yeah, a lot of them. Kim and this woman I just talked about, I guess she's involved again. So, she wasn't flaky. She just moved away. But so I guess she was asking about the membership class. So it seems like she has maybe some intentions of joining. But other than that, nobody. And even of those 14, um, maybe there's 5 or 6. Um, One thing we've noticed, especially with the people who were already Christians and joined and maybe found us on the internet, is because they were new to town and they had moved into Pittsburgh, and they're just more transient. And so, they didn't have roots in Pittsburgh, and so um, we got them because they were new and looking for a church, but then they also just moved somewhere else. So there's a lot of turnover from that. But I think our base of like true Pittsburghers who are there for life and really have roots there, I think that's certainly grown a lot more in our church, significantly more. So we're becoming more and more rooted. But that's something we see of a lot of church plants there, is more, it tends to attract more of a transient population. They move in for work, and then they want to get they want their parents to have more time with the grandkids or whatever, so they go back home. But and then others just left for just a variety, your typical stuff. They just, maybe the church wasn't quite what they thought it was going to be. I think one couple thought it was going to be a little more toward the charismatic side than we really are, and so they were kind of disappointed that we're not going to really go that direction, and yeah, just the typical, just people understand maybe this isn't the church for them. No, there hasn't really been. We've been blessed where there really hasn't been any significant like issues of disunity. There's been one discontent person here and there, but never like any sort of never more than one, honestly. So, um, but yeah, so probably 5 of the 14 are still around. Um, the Lord's blessed us with good stability the past few years. Yes. Yeah, so we had. I'll start with the elders, I guess. I was sort of pretty much running everything by necessity for the first period of time, and then it just became clear that maybe that's not. You can only go so long like that, right? That's not like really a healthy or New Testament model overall. Of course, I was accountable to the elders of Grace Life Church, but they're off-site, right? They don't really know like what's going on. So um, we needed really some local men to really come alongside me. So at my recommendation, Brother Steve came up and interviewed 3 guys and determined that all 3 were fit for pastoral ministry. And not just Steve, but 2 others, Mike Statham and James Vance, came up, 2 other elders from our sending church. And we appointed 3 other guys. One of them moved away to California a couple years later. It was was telling Clark some lame excuse about like the Air Force making him move or something really fishy like that, you know. But yeah, we knew he was only there temporarily. And then Kevin is the man Clark is referring to. Kevin moved into Pittsburgh to for his job for business, and then so he was from the Detroit area, and then he was an elder at that church for 4 or 5 years. Came to Pittsburgh, we made him an elder, and then that church that he was at was just going through some really tough times. It was just some turmoil with the pastor that just didn't seem to be making very wise leadership decisions, or wasn't relating to people very well, it seemed, and so took it from like 125 down to about 25 people, and before he was finally asked to leave. And so it was a church that was really just kind of had all the fight taken out of it, and it was already pretty solid as far as its theology and some of the way they did church. I guess it was healthy in some ways as far as like on paper, the things that they believed and the values that they had, but it was unhealthy relationally. And so they basically begged Kevin to come back, and so Kevin prayed about it. His wife's parents also weren't in good health at all, some significant health issues there, so that was another pull on him. And so we just all prayed about it, and we ended up sending him out. And so they have a building, which is nice. So it's not like starting from scratch, but and he already had they already knew him, right? His condition for going over there was that they basically turn over the keys. So all leaders had to step down, all members had to reapply for membership. They had to take our constitution and bylaws, and there was a name change as well. They changed the name to actually our name, Redeeming Grace Church. So there's a total restart, and they basically, they literally signed over everything to us. And so Kevin's the only elder there now. He went about 4 months ago, and it's very encouraging. Already baptized about 3 or 4 people. So there just seemed to be some people over there that were ripe for the harvest, even in the midst of all the turmoil. And the Lord seems to be blessing the endeavor. Kevin is a very demanding job of 60 plus hours a week. He's actually a CEO for a rather large company, and so he's pulled in a lot of different directions, but he is just a high capacity person, I guess, and is preaching every week. They're looking for an associate pastor. He's doing it for free, and but he wants to use the money they would pay a pastor to hire an associate for him to actually handle more of the day-to-day operations of the church. And so that's a huge prayer request, that the Lord would provide that person. It's ended up being more of a difficult search than they anticipated it being. And so the other 2 elders, Paul and myself, so it was when Matt left with the Air Force, there was just 3 elders. Then one moved to Michigan. And so Kevin, Paul, and myself are sort of the elders we're keeping Kevin as an adjunct elder of Pittsburgh until we get some more. And then Paul and myself are also acting as elders of that church over in Michigan. So I was joking, we're kind of half Presbyterian now, I guess. But one group of 3 kind of overseeing 2 churches. But of course, that's just temporary. So Kevin's hoping to get a couple more elders to join him over there, and at which time Paul and I would drop off. And then we're in the process of ordaining, first evaluating and then ordaining 2 other elders in Pittsburgh that the Lord seems to have called and are, I would say, eminently qualified. And so once we get those other 2 elders, Kevin will drop off from our elder team. So and I anticipate we'll have that in maybe 4 to 6 weeks, where the congregation will have the final vote to vote them in. But yeah, so yeah, that's the story with the Michigan church plant. So it came about really not through our strategic planning or initiation, but really just us responding to what the Spirit seemed to be doing, and just saying, well, this seems to be the Lord's will. We're just gonna, we hate to lose Kevin. He's a great guy, but for the sake of the gospel, like seems to be the direction that things need to go. So, and the Lord supplies whenever we do that. And that's really what the story is. I know I've been sharing a lot of just factual details with you, but really what we've seen in Pittsburgh is a story of God's faithfulness, like every step of the way, like from the very beginning of no pastoral experience paid, no um, connections, no relational network in the community. Like literally, someone fresh out of seminary, not even out of seminary actually, but um, not even knowing what he's doing to where we are of a period of greater stability and seem to be moving forward. Everything we've needed, even the meeting location, like a place to meet for $200 a month, like on a Sunday morning time slot. Like how could you ask for more? Like everything we've needed, it's always been exactly what we've needed when we've needed it, and it's really neat to see kind of God bringing things together in that way. And the men too, the elders. I think for a church of our size, there's probably a significantly higher than average number of just solid elder qualified men. We haven't had any kind of a quota of elders that we have been trying to get, and tempted to put men in there who aren't ready for that. We've just really responded to the men who seem to be qualified already that the Lord has brought. So even with just 80 to 100 people, having 4 solid men, it's just a big blessing in that way, and also men who are very good group leaders that have come. So, good question. Was there one back there? Good question. So Pittsburgh as a whole, like the greater metro area, I'll call it this is borrowing from a pastor friend of mine in Pittsburgh. He calls it a theological junkyard. There's just everything. Of course, the biggest affiliation people have is Catholic, 69% Catholic. Now, most of them, that's kind of like Baptist in Alabama, right? Like they just claim it. They might not even go to church except for Christmas and Easter, but they're Catholic. And then a lot of Presbyterians as well, big Presbyterian area. R.C. Sproul is actually from our area, the southern region of Pittsburgh, and there's a Presbyterian seminary there as well. 2 of them actually, one liberal and one conservative. And then there's just everything else. I mean, literally, there's Unitarian Universalist churches with the rainbow flag, and there's Jehovah's Witnesses, there's Mormon. I mean, there's everything you could imagine. Assemblies of God. I mean, the whole thing. So it's not like very. I mean, even the Catholics is percentage-wise is great, but they're I don't know. Even someone who affiliates Catholic they won't even necessarily know what Catholic theology is. So I used to assume certain things. If someone said they were Catholic, I would assume certain things about their beliefs. I don't even do that anymore. Like I assume they're probably like generally Trinitarian, and beyond that, like it's just not even worth it to assume anything about them, because they just pick and choose what they believe from Catholic theology, really. So they could be like a Universalist, or they could be, really strict. You just never know. So that's it's like the Wild West basically of every kind of philosophy, and of course secularism, and honestly I do think more like progressive, like critical race theory and all that. I think that is sort of a religion now. It's fulfilling a religious function in people's lives, and so I think a lot of people are that religion in Pittsburgh as well. And so as far as the community, that's Pittsburgh as a whole. Our community is Brentwood. I call it like a wannabe suburb, where that's where we live, and it's just outside of city limits. It's probably 3/4 of a mile from city limits. So it's not like the city has its own police force and fire and mayor and everything, but Brentwood is sort of a closed off to outsiders a lot. One experience that is probably representative of what we're dealing with in Brentwood is I was going around knocking on doors when I first got there, which honestly it wasn't very effective in getting people. I think we only had 2 people, and they were both they didn't really stay very long. They were just one was strung out on drugs, and the other was possessed by a demon actually, and I heard her speak in voices that were not her own, but that's another story. So both kind of interesting cases of people I got through the door knocking, but I knocked up on probably a quarter of the doors in Brentwood. So Brentwood's about 10,000 people in that little borough, it's called. And so I probably knocked on a quarter of the doors. And honestly, the way that was most helpful was in just me getting to learn the community. It was more helpful for me than it actually was for outreach. I would just introduce myself, say, hey, my name's Josh, I'm a new pastor in the community. Just introduce myself, and I'd like let them take the conversation from there. And one person asked me, so what's your last name? And I said, oh, well, it's Josh Tancorda. He said, oh, Tancorda. Now that's not a Brentwood name, is it? And so I was like, okay, that's what I'm dealing with here. This is like if you didn't go to elementary and high school here, you're not from here, And it's very, very closed off to sort of the outside community. So if you were to ask someone if they're from here, like if you're in Brentwood and you ask someone, at the coffee shop, are you from here? They might say, no, I'm not from here. I'm from Whitehall, which is 5 minutes down the road, So it's very kind of territorial in that way. So we were initially planning to start a church in Brentwood, and it was just very, very hard. And because of the role that the internet played in us assembling people originally, we ended up just getting people from different communities, mostly in the southern region of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a river, right? So actually 3 rivers, and 2 of them come together and make a third. And so people don't really cross rivers a lot. So most of our area, our target area, I guess, is the southern region of Pittsburgh, south of the river. And so we would get people from all over there. So we ended up just we've moved more and more south. So we started out just outside of the city limits. Then we just followed the geographic center of our people, honestly. So now we're kind of in the suburbs proper, I guess. And the community we're in is, so I still live in Brentwood, the more the closed off wannabe suburb, but the church is located in Bethel Park, which is, we're still learning that community. That's been one challenge. Like all these places we've moved have been in different, it's the southern region of Pittsburgh, but it's like in different communities. So we've never really had like a single community to focus on. We've never been able to like put down roots in any community because we're moving. But now that we have a building, we're actually just beginning. We've had our hands full with the renovations these past few months, but we're really now just starting to really engage our community and get the lay of the land there. And we're pretty close to the center, I would say. So, the municipal building's about 2 or 3 minutes away from us. So, yeah, we're doing like a free oil change event, for example, in a couple months just to connect with the community, and plan on doing like a diaper pantry and kind of figuring out what other churches are doing and then trying to find our niche in that, what seems to be a need here that's not being met that someone else isn't already doing, and trying to engage the community in that way. So I would say we're just at the very beginning of truly engaging the community itself. We've always done like people's relational networks. That's sort of our mainstay as far as outreach has been, like evangelistic Bible studies. So the way we do community groups, I'll just say, we started out trying to use our community groups for evangelism. And so we were trying to help Christians grow and evangelize non-Christians in the same groups. And we just kind of came to the conclusion that, we're trying to do both of these things, and we're really not doing either of them very well, just kind of mediocre. And so let's just let the community groups be completely focused on helping Christians grow and like really pouring into them and getting into some meaty stuff. And then we'll have other groups we call evangelistic Bible studies that are exclusively targeted to people who aren't Christians yet, and just going over basic gospel truths and such. And so we've always tried to, for the past 2 or 3 years, we've been trying to do those evangelistic Bible studies. And so we have been engaging people, but it's like not in a particular community. It's just spread out. Just the people we've been engaging have been just as spread out as our current people are, because it's all about the relational networks, not necessarily what community they live in. So it's just now that we're starting to really engage a specific community, our Jerusalem, I guess you could say, within the larger Pittsburgh area. So, yeah, good question. Other questions? Outreach, methodology, what we believe, how we've handled different challenges. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I understand from their beliefs. I mean, they would say, well, I think there's a slight diversity from my understanding. is that some of them would accept the baptism. They believe baptism is necessary for salvation, but they'll accept like a Baptist baptism as a valid baptism. Some of them. But then a lot of them would not. And so, and a lot of their view, unless you were baptized in the Church of Christ, that it's not a true baptism, and therefore you're not saved. And so they're consistent with their beliefs. You know, they believe that this is a mission field, and they are trying to proselytize and get converts from people they believe are unsaved. So I don't have a problem with their motive, I guess. I just have a problem with their theology. And you know, it'd be the same as maybe us in a Catholic church, where we would, you know, have maybe some concerns about how many of them are truly regenerate, and you know, we would maybe come in there with more of an evangelistic mentality. I mean, that is what they're doing, and they'll try to hide it. That's the issue. He wouldn't. I had to really pin him down one-on-one to get like, look, man, you are trying to do. I know you're trying to do this, and yeah, he kind of admitted it eventually. But yeah, so they're not as widespread up there as they are down here, by any means. There's actually just that one church I know of. So, but they're just very active, and they happen to be using the same channels of, you know, meetup.com and all that. They happen to be using the same channels that I was using, so we kind of crossed paths. So, yeah, interesting. I just met those guys again a few weeks ago. I put some of our old church pews that we were getting rid of. I put those on Facebook Marketplace, and they took them from us. It's like, oh, I know you guys. Best of luck. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. Liberty was a very easy decision. Free tuition. My mom worked in the library there, and so I was able to go there for free. And of course, we lived there. So I tried to work out this system where, you know, I was living on campus, and I could just, you know, as a college student living in the dorms, I could put my dirty clothes in my mom's car, and she'd go home and wash them for me. And she didn't do that. So she said I could wash my own clothes. So that didn't work out, but the free tuition did. And it was a blessing there. There are some more like reformed kind of students, and even a couple of professors there when I went that were more of like reformed theology, kind of, you know, keeping it, not necessarily very vocal about it, but in class, you know, they would kind of indicate some of their leanings. And then Southern Seminary, I sort of wanted to go there to begin with. I had my room picked out at a seminary in North Carolina called Southeastern Seminary, but Southern is very, you know, it is somewhat prestigious academically, so I really respected Al Mohler and everything, and the thing that made me switch was that they had an extension center 2 hours away from Muscle Shoals, so I ended up going there. I think I originally had wanted to go there, but went to Southeastern because I knew Southern was so big, and that I thought the churches in Louisville would just be saturated with seminary students, and I wanted to have more like local church experience, and I thought I could get a more significant role in a local church in the Raleigh area. So yeah, that's kind of what led me. And then I stayed at Southern, just doing it distance after that. Got a couple other degrees. So yeah. I do recommend it. It's a very good school, very flexible, if anyone's considering. So I always emphasize Southern more than Liberty, though. It's good. Okay, very good. Thank you guys for having me. Let me, should I pray? Father, we are grateful for the love and grace you have shown to us. Lord, thank you for the story of Redeeming Grace Church as a story of your faithfulness, Lord, and I'm sure each of us in our own lives could bear witness to your faithfulness as we've seen it, Lord, even in all the twists and turns and unexpected events, Lord, through it all, you are sovereign, you are good, you are infinitely wise, and yes, you are faithful. Lord, we pray that you would help us to have a heart for your glory and your kingdom, Lord, whether that means moving to an entirely different city or staying right here in Arab and being faithful missionaries in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, among our family and our circle of friends, Lord. Help us to be faithful to your call, whatever it might be. And bless the rest of our time this morning. In Jesus' name.